1 cup of exotic herbal tea. That was all it took to turn a dynasty into a graveyard. The madam thought that by slipping the tasteless toxin into the porcelain cup, she was simply discarding a broken toy, a disposable servant girl. She didn't realize she was poisoning the only woman who had ever tamed the beast. She thought she was killing a maid, she didn't know she was killing the mother of the dragon's heir. The rain battered against the bulletproof glass of the penthouse mansion in Gangnam, sounding like 1,000 tiny hammers trying to break it. Inside, the silence was louder than the storm. Ruth kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the black marble floor she was polishing for the 3rd time that hour. She had learned the rules of the house on her first day: be invisible, be silent, and never, ever look him in the eye. You missed a spot, a sharp, venomous voice clipped from the top of the stairs. Ruth flinched, her grip tightening on the rug. It was Mi Kyung, the lady of the house. Beautiful, impeccably dressed in silk, and cold as the grave. Mi Kyung descended the stairs, her heels clicking like a countdown. She didn't look at Ruth, she looked through her. "I apologize, madam," Ruth whispered, scrubbing the spotless floor again. "I will fix it. See that you do. My husband returns tonight. If this house smells like poverty, you will be on the street." Ruth nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She needed this job. Her father's hospital bills were astronomical, and the private lending sharks were circling. Working for the notorious CEO Arion was dangerous. Everyone knew the rumors about his business, but the pay was her only lifeline. Suddenly, the heavy oak front door swung open. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Arion walked in. He was a mountain of a man, wearing a bespoke suit that couldn't quite hide the danger radiating off him. But tonight, he wasn't the composed businessman. His white shirt was stained crimson at the shoulder, and his breathing was ragged. "Arion." Mi Kyung gasped, but she didn't move to help him. She recoiled, disgusted by the blood. "You ruined the Italian carpet." Arion ignored his wife completely. He stumbled, his vision blurring. He was going to fall. Ruth moved before she could think. Breaking the cardinal rule of invisibility, she rushed forward, catching his heavy arm just as he swayed. "Sir," she gasped, struggling under his weight. The scent of iron, cologne, and rain overwhelmed her. For a second, the terrifying Mafia Boss looked down. He expected to see fear. He expected to see greed. Instead, he saw large, terrified eyes filled with genuine worry. "You're hurt," Ruth whispered, her hands trembling as she pressed her cleaning rag against his bleeding shoulder. Arion froze. In 30 years of darkness, no one had ever looked at him with worry. They only looked at him with fear. From the staircase, Mi Kyung's eyes narrowed into slits. She saw the way her husband paused. She saw the spark. And in that moment, she decided that the little maid had to go. Before we continue to the twist, have you ever tried to help someone who scared you, just because it was the right thing to do? Subscribe and tell me in the comments, I read every single one. Now, let's see how the poison enters the picture. Arion didn't push her away. That was the first shock. Instead of barking at her to leave, he let Ruth guide him to the leather sofa. "Get the kit," he grunted. His voice was deep, vibrating in her chest. Mi Kyung stood frozen on the stairs, her face a mask of humiliation. "I'll call the doctor," she said sharply. "No doctors," Arion growled, not looking away from the maid. "She can do it." Ruth's hands shook as she cut away the ruined shirt. Beneath the fabric, his body was a map of scars, a history of violence etched into skin. She cleaned the fresh wound with tender, practiced motions. She didn't flinch at the blood. She didn't judge the scars. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly, her eyes meeting his. Arion stared at her. For the first time, the pain faded into the background. "No," he lied, his voice unusually soft. He reached out, his rough thumb brushing a stray tear from her cheek. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through them both. "Why are you crying?" "I'm the one bleeding." "Because no one should hurt like this," Ruth whispered. In that quiet moment, the dynamic shifted. It wasn't master and servant anymore. It was a man starving for warmth finding a fire in the coldest winter. From the shadows of the hallway, Mi-kyung watched, her fingers gripping the railing until her knuckles turned white. She saw the way he looked at the maid. She wasn't just going to fire Ruth. She was going to make sure Ruth never touched anything that belonged to her again. The next morning, the mansion felt different. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Ruth tried to disappear back into the background, scrubbing surfaces until her fingers were raw. She told herself last night was just a moment of madness. He was a monster, she was a mouse. But Arion was everywhere. He didn't go to the syndicate office. He sat in the library where she was dusting, his dark eyes following her every move like a predator tracking prey. "Stop cleaning," he commanded, slamming his book shut. Ruth froze. "Sir, I must finish." "Sit." It wasn't a request. Ruth sat on the edge of the velvet chair, trembling. "What is your name?" he asked. "Not Maid." "Your name." "Ruth," she breathed. "Ruth." He tested the word on his tongue, making it sound like a prayer. "You saved me last night. I just did my job." "No." Arion stood up, towering over her. "Everyone else in this life would let me bleed out to take my throne. You didn't." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. The scent of sandalwood and danger made her dizzy. He was lethal and magnetic. "I'm not a good man, Ruth," he murmured, leaning down until his lips were inches from her ear. "You should run from me." "I can't," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I have nowhere to go." "Good," he said, a dark possessiveness flaring in his eyes. "Because I don't think I can let you leave now." We all know that feeling when your brain says run but your heart says stay. If you've ever fallen for the person you shouldn't have, hit that like button. It helps the story reach more people who love this kind of drama. Weeks passed. The mansion became a battlefield disguised as a home. Mi-kyung watched her husband come home early every day, not for her, but to catch glimpses of the maid. She saw the lingering touches in the hallway, the shared silences. The breaking point came during a high-stakes dinner with the syndicate lieutenants. Mi-kyung intentionally ordered Ruth to serve the wine, wearing a dress that was far too short. She knew the men would ogle her. When a drunk lieutenant grabbed Ruth's wrist, pulling her onto his lap with a lewd laugh, the room went silent. Ruth froze, terrified, eyes darting to the head of the table. Mi-kyung just smirked, sipping her wine. "Just play along, dear. It's part of the job." Arion shattered his crystal glass against the wall. The sound was like a gunshot. He walked over, grabbed the lieutenant by the throat, and threw him out of his chair. "Touch her again," Arion whispered, addressing the entire room with a calm that was more terrifying than screaming, "and you lose the hand." He grabbed Ruth's trembling hand and dragged her out of the dining hall, past his shocked wife, and straight into his private quarters, a place forbidden to everyone. "Why?" Ruth asked, shaking as he slammed the heavy door, locking out the world. "She is your wife? I am nobody. You are the only thing in this world that feels real," Arion confessed, his voice breaking. He pulled her close, his resistance shattering. That night, the lines weren't just crossed, they were erased. It wasn't about lust, it was desperate, raw need. For the first time, the beast wasn't alone. 2 months later, the secret could no longer be hidden. Ruth stood in the bathroom of the servants' quarters, staring at the 2 pink lines on the test stick. Her hands trembled. She was carrying the dragon's child. She didn't know that Mi-kyung had installed cameras in the servants' quarters. Up in the master bedroom, the wife watched the monitor, a cold smile spreading across her face. Finally, Mi-kyung whispered, reaching for a small, antique vial hidden in the back of her jewelry box. "Now I have a reason to get rid of the trash." That moment when you realize privacy is a myth. If you think Mi-kyung is going too far, comment "she's crazy" below. I want to know whose side you're on. The storm outside mirrored the chaos brewing in the kitchen. Mi-kyung summoned Ruth, her voice sickeningly sweet. She sat at the marble island, 2 steaming cups of tea between them. I saw the test, Ruth, Mi-kyung said, sliding a cup toward the trembling maid. Ruth's blood ran cold. Madam, Don't apologize, Mi-kyung interrupted, her smile tight. I cannot give him a son. You have. In our world, the bloodline matters more than marriage. Drink. It's a traditional tonic for the baby's health. Consider it my blessing. Ruth hesitated. She wanted to believe that this baby could bridge the gap, that she wouldn't be thrown onto the street. Desperate for approval, and trusting the hierarchy of the house, she lifted the cup. She drank it all. 10 minutes later, the ward tilted. A sharp, twisting knife of pain ripped through Ruth's abdomen. She collapsed in the hallway, clutching her stomach, screaming Areon's name. Mi-kyung stood over her, the fake smile gone. Oops, she whispered to the riding girl. I guess you weren't strong enough to carry a dragon. But Mi-kyung had made a fatal miscalculation. She thought she was just removing a rival. She didn't realize that by destroying the unborn child, she wasn't just killing a baby, she was killing the last shred of humanity in her husband. The front door crashed open. Areon was home early. He found Ruth in a pool of blood, pale and gasping. The devastation on his face wasn't just grief, it was the look of a man watching his soul leave his body. He looked at the teacup. He looked at his wife. And then, the beast woke up. She thought she won, but she just signed her own death warrant. Revenge is a dish best served immediately. Hit subscribe if you're ready to see the boss go absolutely feral in the finale. Areon didn't scream. He didn't strike her. He simply looked at Mi-kyung with eyes that were entirely dead. You made a mistake, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm as he scooped Ruth's limp body into his arms. You thought you were poisoning a rival. But you just poisoned the only reason I haven't burned this city to the ground. He turned to his head of security. Throw her out. She leaves with nothing. No money. No coat. No name. If she ever steps foot in Seoul again, bury her. Mi-kyung watched in horror as her empire crumbled in seconds. She hadn't just lost her husband, she had lost her protection, her status, and her life. She was left screaming in the rain, a queen turned into a beggar, while Areon sped away to the hospital, his hand never leaving Ruth's heart. 1 year later. A small house by the sea, far away from the smog and blood of Gangnam. Ruth sat on the porch, watching the waves. She had lost the baby that night, a scar they would carry forever, but she had gained something else. The screen door opened. Areon stepped out, no longer wearing a suit, but a simple white shirt. He looked younger, lighter. The monster was gone, only the man remained. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into him, safe. Are you happy? He asked, the same question he asked every day. Ruth looked up, smiling. I'm alive. And I'm with you. They had walked through fire and poison, but they had come out the other side. The maid and the boss were gone. Now, they were just a family. And that is why you never mess with true love. If this story moved you, please share it with a friend who needs a little romance today. Don't forget to subscribe, I have an even crazier story coming next week. Thanks for watching.